Hi friends, welcome to WebChamp. In this video, I'm going to discuss what is the inheritance in Python. Inheritance is a part of object-oriented programming. So if you want to derive one class from another class, so in that case, inheritance comes in a picture. So deriving class meaning you just have to give the access of one class, meaning attributes and methods to the another class. Okay, so in short, inheritance is a mechanism that allows you to create a new class from an existing class. Okay, and it inherits, meaning the subclass, whatever the new class is derived from the main class, or we can say that the base class. Okay, that will inherit all the attributes, methods from their superclass or base class, and it can extend or override them. So let's see how the inheritance works in actual programming. Let's say you have one class. Let's take an example of employees. So in a company, employee is one category, or we can say the one of the entity of business, right? And this employee is further divided into their department wise. So I will say HR department, then I will say class, right, finance department, and each department has different functionality. Obviously all the employees are not going to do the same thing, so their functionality is not common, right? But yes, obviously few functionalities, few things are common between all the employees. So let's say what is the common. So common is company. So I will say company. I will create the attribute, class attribute as a company. Company will be common for all the employees irrespective of their further classification. Okay, so if I say webcam input icon, now let's say each employee has to log in. So common functionalities can be built here in the employee class. So I will say login, and here I will pass self parameter. Okay, and then I will say print. Okay, so whatever the logic you have to build, you can change this logic as per the your convenience. So I will say print employee logged in. Fine. So this is what the mechanism this employee class have: employee login, log out, and maybe any other common functionalities here you can build. Again, let's say if you divide the employees into the further classification department wise, so you can say HR. So obviously for HR also, companies remain same, right? I will say webchamp infotech. Similarly, the company remains same for the finance also, right? Even HR employee personals required to log in. Then the finance persons also required to log in. Okay, so this is how classification and their functionality, obviously they are going to log in. Okay, each type of employee is going to log in. Then what we want to achieve with the help of inheritance is that we have to achieve the code reusability. So instead of specifying or mentioning, or instead of building the same code for different classes, what we can do is we can inherit the properties of one class to another class, and that is what nothing but inheritance. So here if you write the one class name in the bracket after the class name, so this is what the mechanism of inheritance in Python. Okay, so before inheriting. Okay, what I will do, okay, let's keep this as it is. So we can create the objects for each class. So I will say E1 is equal to employee. Okay, then H1 is equal to HR, then F1 is equal to finance. Okay, fine. So we are able to create the object of each of the class. Let's say here, instead of employee, I will say HR employee is logged in. To differentiate, okay, EMP, I should say here employee and employee. So here I will say finance employee logged in, right? So now, using these objects, as we are very much familiar with this object and class, we are able to access the method of their respective classes. So I will say each class has login method. So I'm doing the same thing here. I'm calling the login method from each class. Okay, if I run this, you will get the output in this way, that employee is logged in, HR employee is logged in, finance employee is logged in. Okay, meaning all these three methods are getting called with the help of three different objects. Okay, but if employee is going to log in, okay, then we don't need to have the separate, meaning the if the code is already built, the common code, okay, instead of writing the two different login method for two different classes, what you can do is you can have the only one method, and this is what the code reusability. You can remove this method, okay, and here you can see that we are inheriting the method of employee class to the HR class. Okay, so now even if I run this, you can see that employee logged in is getting called twice. At very first place, this is called by this E1, the object of employee, and at second line, okay, here it is getting called by the object of HR. So in inheritance, okay, whatever the class you will derive from the any base class, so object of derived class will be able to access all the properties and methods, or all the attributes and methods of the base class. So that's why it is able to access. Okay, so I don't want to build the same functionality or the all the classes, right? So same code we can use. Okay, let's say, but yes, the problem is that, okay, here if I do not write the employee, meaning if I do not inherit the class called employee to finance, then it is throwing error. It says finance object has no attribute called login. Okay, so in that case, what you need to do is you need to extend this class to the employee. And now if you try to run the code, now you will see that employee logged in, employee logged in, employee logged in. Okay, so same kind of functionality, same kind of codes. If the any common codes is between multiple classes, then you can use the inheritance feature to achieve the code reusability. And obviously this is what help us to maintain our applications very easily. Now let's say I don't have, or I have another method defined here, that I will say HR login. Okay, just for the convention purpose, I'm writing this here. So I will say HR logged in. Okay, and if the parent class, or let's say base class object, if try to access the child class method, which is not allowed. Okay, so you cannot access, meaning using object of parent class, you cannot access the properties of child class, methods of child class, but yes, you can access all the methods and properties of parent class or base class or derive, not okay, super class, we can say, to the object of child class. Okay. So if let me remove this, or let's keep it as it is. Okay. So if any class, if you derive from another class, meaning you are going to inherit, meaning the one class which is going to inherit all the properties and attributes of different or another class, that class is called child class, or it may be called as a subclass, or it may be called as a derived class. Okay, the class which is inherited by another class, that can be called as a parent class, then super class, and base class. So these are the three naming conventions for the parent class. These are the three naming conventions for the child class. Right. And we are very much clear now that we cannot, meaning whenever you have to use the inheritance, you need to create the object of child class only. No need to create the object of parent. If you create the parent object, you will not be able to access the methods from child class. Okay, that's why. And obviously why inheritance is important, because to achieve the code reusability. Okay, so I don't want to do that. Even you don't need to define this also, right? If I say pass, why? Because company name is again common between all these classes, so it is not necessary to define. Now we are very much familiar with the what is the inheritance. So extending the one class to the another class, so that object of that extended class would be able to access the all the properties and methods of its parent class, right? So this is what the inheritance. Then how it works for the constructor, right? So we have seen in my previous video that what is the use of this self parameter. Self parameter is used for the object purpose only. Okay, so it represents the object itself, object of the class itself or its child. Okay, anything is fine. Let's say here, let me, okay, let it remain as it is. I will say I will create the object of a char class, and so far I'm not passing any variable because we don't have created any constructor here. If you want to create the constructor, you can create the constructor, and if you want to add the parameter, you can add the parameter. But if you add the parameter to initialize the attributes of objects, you need to pass the values to that parameter from this method, right? So even here you can say HR h1 dot name. So who has logged in, if you want to see, so I will say h1 dot name is equal to Deva. Okay, so this is what going to log in. This is what it is going to log in. Now let me say if I wanted to access that, okay, so we can write h1 dot name here. But the problem is that what is the h1 for employee class? So far it don't know. Okay, until and unless we run the code, it don't know. So instead of this, what we can do, we can use self dot name, and this name is coming from here. Okay, so let me run this code. If I clear the screen and if I run this, okay, So if h1 name is defined, so I can say h1 dot, I can call the login method. Until unless you call the method, you will not be able to see the output. Okay. So employee logged in Deva. Right. So this is how. So whatever the attributes are there for the child class, you can access those in the parent class directly also. But it is not always the case that whatever the properties the child class have, the same properties are available in the employee class or for the employee class. So in that case, what we can do, we can create the difference. So we have to see how constructor inheritance works. So if I say in it, okay, and here I will say print, just to understand, I will write like this: parent constructor. Okay, and child class, again I will implement this the init method, meaning the constructor of child class, but here I will say this is what the child class. Okay, so now let's say if you have the constructor in both the classes, so it's question that what constructor will get called if we create the object of child. So obviously whenever we create the object of child, this method, this all these methods even with the constructor is also getting inherited. Okay, so now if I run this, you will see that it is calling the child constructor by default. But let's say if I don't have child constructor, so in that case it is going to call the parent constructor. Okay, so what is happening? Okay, if you have constructor in the child class and if you have constructor in the parent class, so parent class constructor will be overridden by the child class constructor. Even the same thing is going to happen with other methods also. If I say define and then if I say login, okay, if I build the same method, I don't want to return anything so far, so I will say print and HR is logged in. I will write like this. Okay, so now this h1, meaning the object of h1 HR class, is going to call the method from the class itself, whatever the method he has at his end. If I run this, you can see that HR is logged in instead of calling the parents methods. Okay, so when parent class method will get called whenever you don't have the method exist in the class itself, then it will go and it will access the method of parent. Otherwise, it is not going to access. Now, let's say employee has a few details here. Okay, so I will say a few parameters like EMP ID, name, and I will say company. Okay, so these are the parameters are there here, and let's say you may want to initialize these attributes of object. Okay, so let's say company name is coming from the object itself. Obviously, the employee ID will be at object's end because we don't know who is going to log in. So we will create the structure with the help of class, and then employee will give the values for that specific attributes. Name is again person specific, but company is not person specific. That's why we do not consider the company as a object attribute, because this is common. That's why we will make that term as a class attributes. Right? And if you write anything, any kind, I mean, if you create any kind of variable outside of this constructor, that will be considered as a class attribute. Class attributes. And here you have to initialize the object attribute. So let's say self is the parameter that is going to represent the object itself, and then if I say emp id is equal to, and whatever the parameter you will receive, you, because this employee ID and name, these are the parameters, so they works like local variable for this method. So here I will say name is equal to name. Now question is which constructor will get called. Okay, even here you can see that we are having the constructor for the employee, and as we have seen, the HR object has no attribute called name, and we are trying to access. Okay, so this method we are going to access, right? So this method required name parameter, but HR constructor, this constructor is not having any kind of name parameter. That's why it is throwing the error, right? So let's say we have few specific parameters. Obviously HR will have the employee ID, so common parameters we can define emp id, then name, and okay, so designation, or I will say title will be specific to the department. Okay, finance people will have different title, and employee, this is a common term, so this is not specific to the title, because employee can have different titles. Okay, so this designation or department will be a specific, okay, but in case of, let's say, hr, okay, so here what we can do, so for all the employee, obviously department remains same, so we can say, we can define here department as a class attribute. Why? Because it is remains same for all the employees of hr, meaning all the objects of hr class. If the object is of hr type, obviously the department will remain same. So here I will say human resource, right? So this is what the common. That's why whenever you have anything common between all of your objects, so you can define them as a class attributes. So now here we have employee ID, employee name, and here we have title. Okay, so now since we have the separate constructor in child class, then how to initialize these values? Okay, let's say if I write like this, self dot emp id is equal to emp id, this is going to work. Then self dot okay, not emp, so I will say name is equal to name. Then I will say self dot title is equal to title, right? So this is how parameters I can initialize, and yes, this is going to work. This is going to work. Let me clear the screen, and if I run this, okay, so here you can see that hr init missing 3 required positional argument, emp name title. Okay, so we are creating the object which required a few parameters. So here we have to pass, let's say employee ID is 1001, name is Deva, and the title is executive HR. Okay, so this is how the properties are there. Now if I run this, so you can see that employee logged in Deva. So it is able to access because this method gets inherited here, and we have already initialized. That's right. But again, the problem is that, okay, name and employee ID, these two are the common. And then we already have the mechanism to initialize those attributes here in the parent class. Then why we need to initialize them here, right? So this this thing is not going to make sense if we initialize the here. Obviously it will access, obviously it will work, but then what is the use of inheritance, right? So what we can do, we can initialize these, meaning we can call the constructor of parent class with the help of employee, meaning the class name dot underscore underscore init method, okay. And here in this method you can say self, then you can pass employee ID, then you can pass name, then you can pass, okay, you don't need to pass the title. Why? Because title is specific to the this HR department, right? And here we have initialized the title. If you pass title to the super, meaning employee, that doesn't make sense because there is no parameter to receive that value, right? So we don't need to, whatever the properties are common, whatever the object attributes are common, okay. And if we initialize those attributes in parent class, we don't need to initialize the same in the child class also. Okay, now let me run this. Even you can see that still it is able to read the self dot name as a div, right? Because it is initialized here. It is fine, okay, no matter whether you initialize the attributes in child class constructor or parent class constructor, it is not going to affect anything. But it is always good practice to initialize the common terms at the parent class, okay. Then because self is going to represent for the object itself, so wherever you can see self, it is a object, okay. Now instead of this employee, what we can have in a Python is that, okay, you can use this super method, okay. So whenever you have to call the any method of parent class, you can use super method, you can use super method. And whenever you use super method, you don't need to pass the self here, because super method itself pass the object, so we don't need to pass that. And in that case also you can see that it is working, right? So common attributes we can initialize in the parent itself, and then that can be used in the child class because that is possible. So this is how constructor inheritance works, super method anywhere, okay. Let's say here also, if you want to define the login method, okay. So here even you can see that in the login, I'm passing the self as a object, okay. So this is every time you need to use this whenever you define the new method inside a class. And what I'm going to return a super class dot login. So super we can use to call the methods. Even if you want to call the attributes and all, even in that case also you can use the super method to call the attributes and all. Not only the method and all. So here if I say name, right, you can see that name is accessible, company is accessible, employee ID is accessible, login method is accessible. So these all these terms are accessible using super method also. Okay, so overall purpose of this inheritance is to improve the code reusability, so that same kind of features we don't need to build in for each of the class. Instead of that, if we write in this way, meaning if we inherit the properties, that is going to work. HR. Okay. So we have the different types of inheritance in Python. So single inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, multi-level inheritance, hybrid inheritance, multiple inheritance. Okay, so these are the types of inheritance. So far, whatever we have seen is just a single inheritance. Okay, this is what if we consider the employee class and HR class. So HR class is going to inherit all the properties of properties and methods. Okay, properties nothing but attributes. Okay, properties and methods of employee class. So this is what the single inheritance. Let's say if finance is going to inherit the properties of HR, then HR is inheriting the properties and methods of employee. So finance object is able to access all the methods and properties of employee class. So this is what our multi-level inheritance. So first one is a single level, second one is multi-level. So here you can see that one class is super class, and then it can have any number of subclasses the way I have here written here. Okay. Another thing is that multiple inheritance. Let's say multiple inheritance, meaning one class is going to inherit the properties of two different classes. Okay, so this is what, let's say employee is separate class, HR is separate class, and then finance is going to inherit the properties of employee and HR, both the classes. So multiple inheritance is possible in the finance, but the problem is what, okay, let's say here login method is login, employee login. Okay, and I will create one more login method. So let's say if you have same method in both the classes, then which method will get called? Okay, so I will say self. So this is what the point of interest. So see print here, I will say HR logged in. Okay, employee logged in and HR logged in. I'm not going to add any parameter to these methods because that is not required. So now here finance is going to inherit the properties of HR and employee. So which method will get called first, right? Because both the classes have this method. So okay, if I run this, what will happen? You can see that. Okay, before that I need to call the method. So okay, HR h1. Okay, instead of this, now what I need to do is I need to use finance here. Okay, why? Because finance is going to, it's extreme last class. So this is our child class. So we always used to create the object of child class. That's why I created object of this class, right? So now here which constructor will get called, which class constructor? So obviously employee class constructor has two parameters, and HR constructor has three parameters, and employee name and title, employee name and title. So which it should, so whichever the class you will write first in the bracket, so that class methods are called first. Okay, if I will show you, if I run this, so you can see that HR logged in, right? Even constructor is called from this. Let's say if I write employee here and HR as a second, if I run this, it will throw errors. Okay, it says employee.init. Now it is calling the employee class constructor. Why? Because we have written the employee first. Okay, so whatever will be there, whatever the class you will use as a first inheritance point, so it will call the methods from that. If the method is not exist, then it will go and it will call the method from second. Okay, so here what I will do, I will remove the title because it is calling the constructor of employee. Now this will work. Okay, employee logged in. Okay, let's say I don't have this method here, employee class don't have login method. So what will happen? Then it will call the login method from HR class, second class, right? So here you can say that output is HR logged in. So this is about the multiple inheritance. One class is going to inherit the multiple properties and methods of multiple classes. If commons are there, left side preference will be given first. Then the hierarchical is very much simple. Okay, if you have a couple of classes and one class is inherited by all those classes, subclasses, we can say that that is a hierarchical inheritance. Hybrid is a combination of any two, multiple or multi-level inheritance, multiple, or we can say hierarchical inheritance. Any two type of inheritance can be combined as a hybrid inheritance. So this is all about the inheritance in Python. So I hope you like the content of this video. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a nice day.